Hi everyone, Kelly Beatty coming to you live from the Chelmsford Senior Center here in North Chelmsford, where we're going to have the fourth and we hope final installment of the fall session of annual town meeting. Those of you who were with us on Monday night saw a very prolonged, very heated, very passionate discussion about allowing departments here in the town, and especially the school department, public schools, to amend their budget to give them more money. That money is coming from something called free cash. It's the money that's left over, the surplus, if you will, at the end of the prior fiscal year. So after a long debate, a testy debate, that was passed. $1.1 million is going to the combination of various town departments, and especially the school department. The school department received $729,000 to help offset a deficit that was discovered within the past few months. I'm sure you've heard much about that, but if you hadn't, Monday night's discussion was all you needed to hear, because it was really one of the most intense nights I've seen here at town meeting in roughly 20 years of covering it. Now tonight we're going to finish the rest of that process. The other shoe will drop, so to speak, because the rest of that free cash money is going to be spent. It's about $1.5 million, more or less. And there had been two proposals on the table. In fact, three proposals. There were supposed to be 4 articles left on this warrant, 2 of which were going to spend money. One was going to allocate $1.2 million toward the DPW facility, the Department of Public Works, on the Alpha Road, to finish the second phase of construction there. Now the facility's up and running, but they needed to do other things, improve maintenance facilities and so forth, which are still way over on North Chelmsford. But that article was withdrawn. And the reason is, with so much money going to the schools to offset their deficit, and also with the remainder of the money going into free cash, and also the uncertainty about funding from the state, it was decided that that article is going to be withdrawn. The other article that was withdrawn had to do with reducing the tax levy by taking some of that free cash and returning it to the taxpayers. According to Paul Cohen, with town manager Paul Cohen, I spoke to him just a few minutes ago, there's not enough of the free cash money left to accomplish that, and the last remaining thing that is going to be on the docket tonight, which is to take that free cash and put it into the stabilization fund, the rainy day fund. And so I think what you will hear is some back and forth between those in the town that are following the recommendation of the Board of Selectmen, the Finance Committee, and others to send that money to free cash, the town manager, and the contingent that would like to see that money at least in part returned to the town's citizens for effectively overpaying their taxes last year. So stand by for that. That could be the bulk of this evening's discussion. However, the only other article on the warrant, which is Article 7, is a citizen's petition by Patrick Maloney, head of our Permanent Building Committee, to authorize $150,000, again from free cash, to demolish the Center Fire Station, the station that has been replaced by the one that's being built over next to Town Hall. You might have heard that the Center Fire Station is in a fair degree of disrepair and probably not salvageable, at least in the opinion of structural engineers who have taken a really close look at it. Again, there's a contingent in town that thinks that building could be repaired, returned to some sort of productive use, rather than simply being a vacant lot. So we're going to see a proposal to see what that vacant lot would look like if the building were torn down, and others, I'm sure, who will come forward and recommend that it be preserved. So be prepared for a number of amendments tonight, just as we saw on Monday night, and also be prepared for a little bit more contentious debate. Now, this is the fourth meeting so far that we've had in an annual town meeting that we began way back on October 20th. And there really haven't been that many articles on this warrant. There's about 10 on the regular warrant. We snuck in 4 more for the special town meeting that began this past Monday. I'm sorry, the last week. So ordinarily those would go by pretty quickly. Fall town meeting, let's remember, is the one that does not typically involve budgets. And yet this year we are in the thick of it with budgets, and the debate isn't quite done. So please stay tuned with us. Town Moderator John Curlin will be calling the meeting to order just momentarily. We hope to have this one done well. Maybe we can take bets. The thinking is that we'll be done by 10:30. I'm going to be real optimistic and say 9:45. So we'll see who wins that one. So please stay tuned. Thanks for joining us.
What's going to cost him his job? I'm telling you right now. Plus, there's going to be a grand jury hearing on other stuff. Really heavy. We're almost on. Okay. Good evening, everyone. It's 7:30. I'm calling the session of the Fall Town Meeting to session. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. You're welcome, John. I'd like to again announce where the fire exits are. There's two on the wall to my left, two on the wall to my right, and through the hallway behind. I've also been asked to request that if you have to leave the meeting early, kindly drop off your electronic voting devices with the checkers at the front hall. I do have an individual who wish to speak, who will require your approval before he can be permitted to address town meeting. His name is Jonathan Longchamp. He's the principal president of Daigle Engineers, Inc., to offer testimony to town meeting. He's a resident of Atkinson, New Hampshire. May I see a vote of hands of your little chits there? All in favor? All opposed? Mr. Longchamp shall be permitted to speak before town meeting. At this time, I'd like us to use the electronic voting devices so we can declare whether or not there's a quorum. You have 35 seconds.
Kelly Reed from Chelmsford Telemedia. I can see that there are fewer seats filled tonight than there have been in the weeks past. So let's see how many we need. Certainly, I think we have a quorum. But there's only approximately 120 out of the 162 town meeting reps here. Number of absences you can see. Perhaps they've just not gotten here yet. They'll be fashionably late.
Okay, I declare that we have a quorum. So, Mr. Town Manager, first article we will be addressing is Article 6.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'd like to present the petitioner of Article 6, Pat Maloney.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Patrick Maloney. I'm here as a resident for these two articles, but I'm also co-chairman of the Permanent Building Committee. We have withdrawn the citizen petition to perform the work to install mechanics bays at the DPW at this time, based solely on the fact that when we first put the petition together for this article, there was free cash available. None of the school issues or any of the other things that we've been grappling with the past couple of months was up at that point. But as soon as those things came up, we decided that we would stand down and get out of the way in favor of taking care of the schools. So Article 6 was officially withdrawn.
Thank you, Mr. Maloney. We'll now proceed to Article 7.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Article 7 has to do with the demolition of the current fire station, Central Fire Headquarters at 7 North Road. I've taken a lot of different slides that we've put out over the years and just kind of put them together for a presentation. What I want to do to start with the presentation here is kind of go over the areas where we've prompted people to think about this. I've gotten a lot of comments that this came out of the blue and why did it come out of the blue and so on. You see me here twice a year in front of this body. I try to prompt everybody for things that may be coming down the road. So this is the slide that we that we showed in the spring when I was here last. You can see it says April town meeting, and if you look at the bottom, you know, we need to talk about 7 North Road. At the same time, we also threw out some suggestions. When we filed the petition for this article, we felt that it was appropriate just to ask for the demolition and grading and putting a lawn in on this property. So we didn't feel like it was our position to say what that property may be used for. But we've had long discussions. I'll explain all that shortly. But back in the spring, we threw out some ideas where we showed the, you know, the property as it sits today. We showed what we might be able to do if we did a park there. Maybe an information center, something like that. Picture of the front of the building. And we also thought that maybe a little bit of parking, an information center, some public bathrooms. Again, we're not advocating that use. We were just throwing out ideas. Funny, as I was talking to one of the local reporters recently, and we were talking about the group that wants to make a museum out of the fire station, and she alerted us and said, you know, you both want an information center potentially there. And she said, it's interesting that you both want that, because in the 10 minutes she stood outside talking to the chief that day, 2 people came up and asked for information. You know, so, and in addition, I've been told just recently that a couple from Chelmsford, England pulled into the station looking for information. So it's the perfect spot. It's right in our town center. It's where people would look for information because of the beauty and all of the charm surrounding that area. So we've talked about these types of things as a potential. A couple of years ago, when we knew that the station would be going, we talked about maybe moving the Dutton House over, and at the time we thought maybe David Hedison could use it for housing. Didn't pan out, but again, we've been talking about this for a while. So this really isn't anything new. We've been building the station for 18 months now since we've been approved. We've prompted and prompted again for discussion, and after reviewing tri-board meetings over the summer and seeing no discussion whatsoever, we felt it important to go ahead and at least get the discussion started. You've seen all these pictures. These are all from 2008, 2009, all of these pictures and slides. It's what we've worked on for years and years to get the project approved. You can see the mess of the electrical services, support spaces. The entire basement and the main floor is held up with all these heavy 6x8, 8x8 shoring timbers. One of our concerns, should this building remain vacant for too long, is safety. Somebody gets in there and knocks one of those posts over, and one of the other posts come down on them, there's going to be a real problem. So vandalism could be a real safety issue. The fire chief will get up and talk about what he expects in the way of boarding that property up. But you know, the building is in tough shape. Again, there's the cribbing that's holding up the entire apparatus floor. You see the netting up above there. That netting's there to keep people from getting hit on the head when the concrete breaks away from the floor. So again, it's a safety issue. This building is not sound. It's not solid. You see daylight through the walls, so on. Cracks in the building. Cracks like the one in the photo above, where they go straight up and down, window to window. That's not a good thing. The ones on an angle are better. The ones that go straight up and down. By the way, we have Jonathan Longchamp here, who's the engineer that wrote the final report that suggested that this building was not a good candidate for renovation or refurbishment. Their report is available online for anybody that hasn't seen it. But basically, the gist of the report is, in summary, given the known structural issues combined with the probable structural upgrades involved with all but the most limited of renovations, it's our professional opinion that the building is not a viable candidate for a repair and renovation. So what would the cost to demo it be? We've gone out, we've actually solicited quotes for this work. RFP bidding and hazardous material assessment, we've allowed $20,000 for. Abatement of the hazardous material, which is window caulking, floor tile adhesive, those types of things that we know are in the building now. So there's a fair amount of asbestos to be abated. The actual demolition of the building and filling the site, grading the site. And then we've carried a contingency to make sure that if we open up the walls and there's something in there like vermiculite or something that we weren't expecting, and vermiculite is a type of old insulation. Anybody with an old home, you might see it looks like a brown popcorn material. That's asbestos. So we've carried a contingency to make sure that we're good for the funds that we're requesting.
So you done? Yeah, I'm good.
As an idea of what it might cost to renovate this building, this is a slide from our March 9th, 2009 presentation to the Board of Selectmen showing the options for a fire station. The first option at that time was repair North Road now and construct a new fire headquarters at Wilson Street in the future. Again, we were looking at the possibility of buying time should the voters decide that it wasn't time to build a new central fire headquarters. At the time, just to replace the floor, we were looking at $590,000. The sketches that dollar amount is based on is in the report, the current report from Daigle Engineers. So he references in his report that a few years back, we looked at what it might take to fix the floor. That's the number, that's the estimate number for that. The second one was renovate North Road for short-term needs now, construct new headquarters in the future. We were thinking, again, if we had to hold over, that might be an option where we'd replace the floor and do upgrades to the kitchens and bathrooms to at least give the men a decent facility to work out of. So these were estimates done and prepared back in 2008 that were presented in early 2009. So you can guess what those costs may be now, several years later, 6, 7 years later when the time comes. So if you add the escalation, you can see that those will go up. But further to that, and the building commissioner is here tonight too, and he can speak to this, and the engineer again. So when the floor was designed and when these estimates were put together back in 2008, sorry, just lost my train of thought. But when we put these estimates together, it was based on the 6th edition building code. We are now on the 8th edition building code, much more stringent. So we would be looking at, if anybody, we or a developer, were to rehab this building, they would have to do complete seismic work to bring this building up to code. They would have to do lateral force work. Basically, it would be a huge undertaking for anybody that decided to take that building on. So we have officials here tonight that can speak to that. We think the cost is easily $1.5 to $2 million to get the building in shape enough to be able to use it for any purpose. This is the last slide of the presentation, but I also want to talk about what we've talked about in the Permanent Building Committee. And we've had long discussions over many years now as what could be a possible use for this site. So we talked about selling it or leasing it. We'll start with renting or leasing. When we talked about that, I guess our first reaction was the town should not be a landlord. you take on a certain amount of liability when you become a landlord. With a building like this and the condition that it's in, short of us going and putting a large amount of money in it to make it leasable, you would take on extraordinary liability. So we didn't think leasing, after numerous discussions, was appropriate. We talked about the sale of the building. I'm one of those people that think we should never sell town land, period. That's my personal opinion. But we did talk about the sale of the building and what the possibilities could be. This building sits on a 10,000-foot lot. You can see the asphalt that surrounds that building is the area that you'd have for parking. It's it. That's the whole lot. There's nothing more. There's 10,000 square feet there. The building takes up more than half of that footprint. So if you consider selling the property, well, when you think about that property and the area surrounding it, we probably made a mistake way back when selling that property at all, but it's where we were. However, you know, there's a dead horse we've all been beating for a long time surrounding that property, and we just didn't feel like it was worth any liability or any headaches involved, because there'd be several different groups, entities, whatever, that would be up in arms over the sale of the property or who was to purchase it or put RFPs in. Further to that, when we talk about the sale of the property, and I'm not an attorney, but we have some really smart people on my committee. We have engineers, architects, and so on. We have commercial real estate professional that handles commercial real estate portfolios. We have some really smart people. So we talked about, what if you floated an RFP? Well, you could float an RFP, but we were concerned about the liability of that. We were concerned about who would bid on it, what type of numbers would come in, what type of uses. Even if the town, in our opinion, and again, I'm not an attorney, but even if we put language in an RFP that said we reserve the right to reject any and all bids, we feel like if an entity put in a bid, a large bid or otherwise, or had a bit good use, or if somebody else with a lesser bid that it maybe had a better use that the town might like, we felt that those RFPs could be challenged. If somebody was sue happy in this town, we could likely end up in a big, long drawn-out lawsuit. So we felt sale was just not a viable option here. It's a small piece of land. It's right in the beautiful center with our new Center for the Arts, the clock tower, the clock, all the other buildings totally restored around there. I actually sat at the Common the other day and looked around and said, my goodness, it's beautiful. The lines are down. Everything is totally updated and beautiful. And I scan across and I see a picture of the building. The building was built in 1953 as a utilitarian building for a call fire department. It was not a building that was meant to fit in the town center with a lot of beautiful other buildings. It was a building that was meant to be utilitarian and serve its useful life and probably go the way of demolition at some point in the day. So we talked about the sale of it. Then we went on and we talked about other ideas like we've shown. Maybe it's a park, maybe it's an information center, maybe it's parking, maybe it's a place for the moms to take the kids and get out of the sun during the July 4th festivities, whatever it is. We think that there's a lot of different great uses that would benefit the town. We owe it to ourselves. This, to me, is the most important piece of land that the town owns right now, because it can be such a wonderful addition to what's become just a magnificent town center. So we've had long discussions about all of that in committee. We've brought this up several times in the past, and so therefore, we decided to bring it forward and get the discussion going. So I think the discussion, as it boils down, and I've been online looking to see what comments are, and I've had a few town meeting reps call and ask for information. We think it's best to go ahead and get the building down and figure out the use at a future time. But, you know, at the end of the day, I think it comes down to does the town want to sell this and run the risk of whatever? Or do we want to take this property and do we want to make it another gem within a gem of the center? I'm open for questions.
Okay, now is the time for question and answers. Anyone can approach the microphone and ask questions of the proponent.
Gail Kruglock, Precinct 7. Could you clarify what type of liability you would have on an RFP? If you put out an RFP for a bid, I know I'm in residential real estate, so maybe commercial is different, but why would you be required, or how could you be in a lawsuit by not, I mean, owning the land, you can put a deed restriction on it as to future use. If we were to sell it, it could be restricted for future use. If you put out an RFP, you can evaluate, it doesn't always have to be the highest bidder, it could be the best choice. So where would the liability fall?
Well, our feeling was, quite honestly, if we went with, let's say somebody put in a bid of $100,000 and we thought that they had the best use, and the town decided that's great, but we also had a bid for $1 million.
Right.
You know, if somebody really were so happy and said, hey, I've proposed $1 million and you've shown intent to sell, I mean, it's just our opinion that we could be challenged on that. So, you know, we've gotten in many frivolous lawsuits over the years, and,
well,
you know, we just felt like the possibility was there for that. So I preface that by saying I wasn't an attorney, and maybe there's an attorney in the room that might be able to speak to that, but the fact is that, you know, we feel like anything can be challenged these days, and, you know, we've had our share of nuisance lawsuits, and so when you're showing intent to sell, and who's to say really what the best and highest, you know, best intent or, you know, the best project is.
The seller usually is the one to say. The seller is generally the one to
Can't hear
say.
you.
I'm sorry, please speak into the microphone.
Oh, I'm sorry. The seller is generally the one to say what is the best offer presented to them, whether it be financially or whether it be what they would like to see
Are
done.
you asking a question or are you
Isn't
making
it?
comment?
Well, I mean, you know, I'm sure that you've seen, Gail, and I know you're a real estate agent, so I'm sure you've seen silly lawsuits come out of silly deals because people get sideways with things. So, I mean, that's the only point we were going to make. We felt like it could be challenged, that's all.
Possibly.
Jim Curley, Precinct 7. I think we just heard from the previous speaker, through you, Mr. Moderator, that there could be potential future restriction put on if it was sold to a private developer. Is that true? Does anyone know?
Well, or you can ask town council or the proponent.
I would defer to council, but I'm sure that we as a town could put some restrictions on it, but why would you want to sell a gem within a gem?
Understood. So if there were restrictions, maybe the town council can answer. So my pointed question is, could 40B be prohibited if that were sold to a private developer?
Well, there are two questions in there. One is, can the town, in selling property it owns, place deed restrictions on it? Absolutely. That can be part of the RFP. That can be part of the process. Obviously, any restrictions you place on a piece of property will affect the value that you can expect to receive for it. Specifically restricting 40B, conceivably, but I think you'd want to be careful because there is some case law out there that suggests that towns should be careful about targeting 40B in particular, but as a hypothetical, you could restrict residential development, you could restrict certain densities, you could restrict sizes, you can do pretty much anything you want as part of that RFP.
Okay, thank you. And one last one. If for any reason, excuse me, it turned into a park like is one of the suggestions or one of the potentials with some parking out in front, would that be public parking?
We wouldn't, well, I mean, that would be the town's choice, but we think that a little extra parking would benefit the Center for the Arts, as well as spots for emergency vehicles during our, public festivities and things like that. So, I mean, this was an idea, just a concept. Again, we're not promoting this,
Understood.
but
Great.
you can see what could happen.
Thank you.
Kirk Marshall, Precinct 4. Why are we in such a rush? Why can't we wait till spring to talk about this?
This body could absolutely wait till spring. I've been talking about it for 2 years. We've been talking about it in committee for a long time now. So, I just didn't want an unsafe building. When we do turnover in a couple of weeks, when the fire department officially shuts the lights off in that building and turns the lights on in the other building, immediately the letters come off the building, big signs go on the building saying station closed, because you run the risk of somebody pulling in there thinking that it's still a fire station that might have a medical emergency or what have you. So you've got to put very large, stand-in-your-face signs that say station closed, call 911, new location 50 Billerica Road. You have to take the lettering down so people know that it's not a fire department anymore, that type of thing. The chief had indicated that he would want it boarded up for safety measures. So, if that's what we want to look at, I think that's the town's decision.
Have you had the opportunity to seriously look at the offers that have been made in the last week or so that I believe I read in the Lowell Sun, and why should the town incur the cost to demolish the building if a private developer was willing to do that?
Well, my personal feeling would be then you run the risk of what that private developer wants to put in there and town loses control.
But I don't care about your personal feeling. What about the town? What's in the best interest of the town?
Well, once again, Mr. Marshall, you will decide what's in the best interest of the town, okay? The presenter has stated what his preference is,
Thank
but
you.
you're the one.
Glenn Thorne, Precinct 5. Perhaps to you, Pat, or somebody else sitting in the front of the room, is how much space in the center of town does the town currently own that can be converted to open space or to any other purpose that we deem fit? Because I always think of things like, there's Wilson Street, that's open space as well. I'm not sure that's in the center of town, but do we have any other space that would be like this space in the center of town that we could do with what we please?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, is there any space near to the center of town? I mean, Wilson Street comes to mind, but the town, does the town own any open space near the center of town?
Other than Wilson Street, none that I'm aware of.
Thank you.
Debbie Derry, Precinct 6. When you say that you're going to put a sign stating that the fire station is closed, I know another fire station in this town that was closed for maybe, 3 years at least, and that was the South Fire Station.
Do you have a question?
Well, I'm getting to a point that said call 911. That being said, there can be restrictions put on that building, and if the building is torn down,
Do you
don't
have a
you
question?
think- I'm getting to it.
Well, no, just ask the
Don't you
question.
think that if someone was going to purchase it where it's grandfathered in for the structure of the current property, that structure is worth more if we would keep it the way it is, even though they reconstruct the building?
I suppose that would imply that you want to sell the building, and if that's what you want to do, then keeping the building up would probably be appropriate.
But we did have land in the center of the town, if you can recall, that was open space.
Okay, now, once again, you're arguing.
David Foley, Precinct 5. Mr. Moderator, to the Speaker. I'm just curious, has there been any efforts to solicit suggestions for the use of the building for the residents of the town? I know that people here maybe have heard about this at the last town meeting and such, but I've gotten some calls from some residents who have some ideas, and maybe this kind of came upon them without knowing about it. So I don't know, have there been attempts to try to find out if people had ideas on things to use this building for? Thank you.
You know, the only way I can answer that is it's disappointing to a committee that we all put a lot of time and effort into, and you know, you expect that word will get out. We typically, most committees in this town have a liaison. I know when we did the school building project, we had a liaison that came to every single meeting, and he'd go back and he'd do selectmen reports, and he'd say, hey, this is what they talked about where the school projects are concerned. This is what they're going to talk about going forward. We'd actually have people come that next week and say, I was watching the selectmen meeting and I heard that you guys were going to be talking about this. We're not afforded that anymore. As a matter of fact, we just found out who our liaison was about a month ago. So, you know, it's very difficult for us to get out and broadcast all the good work that goes on, and I am very proud of this committee. We have some very, very intelligent, smart people, and you know, this is the thing where sometimes politics gets involved, and instead of trying to understand what we've talked about or those types of things, you know, it goes in a different direction. So we've had a lot of good, long discussions. It's unfortunate that we don't get a lot of the information that we put forward other than meeting minutes going online. We don't get a lot of the information out there, and I don't know what else to do that. I try to talk to as many people. I come here twice a year and try to get the discussion started here around these types of things. So, you know, it's unfortunate, but you know, I wish we had more publicity over the past couple of years. But you've seen all these pictures and slides before, and so this isn't the first time.
Nancy Donahue, Precinct 9. From the reading of the article, it's primarily for the demolition of the property. What assurances do we have from you or from that down the road the town will not sell this to somebody or use it for another purpose?
I can't guarantee it, but I'm sure that Paul Cohen could answer that question.
Under state law, in order for the property to be sold by the town, it would need a 2/3 vote of this town meeting. This article does not contain any authorization for the sale, nor would it be within the scope of the article to seek such authorization. So in summary, if the town wants to sell it, the first stop is to come to town meeting, get a 2/3 vote to get the approval to sell the property. That's not happening with this article. And again, if it were to happen, it would have to come to this town meeting.
This article just addresses the demolition of the property.
Exactly. It does not convey any authorization for sale.
So down the road, it could be sold.
It would have to come to town meeting for a 2/3 vote in order for it to be sold, and then it'd have to be a competitively bid process to solicit proposals as written in an RFP by the town for it to be sold. So the fact that we've got unsolicited proposals last week, we can't do anything with those.
But they could be viewed after the demolition?
No, we'd have to
After
come
the
back
demoli-
to, we
after
have
the
to come
demo-
back to a town meeting, get a 2/3
Yes.
vote, then
Yes,
draft
I
an
understand
RFP,
that. I understand
then
that.
solicit proposals. The proposals we have would not be valid at that point. One of them has an expiration date of January, and the other one was just a solicitation of interest. So we don't have anything that we could bring back to you. It may come at a future time if that's what the town decides to do.
Yes, I guess that's my question.
Yes, it would need town meeting authorization.
Okay, thank you.
Sam Polton, Precinct 8. I guess I share some of the concerns raised by the previous speaker, so I would like to ask why the warrant says to transfer from free cash the sum of $150,000 to fund the demolition and disposal. The word disposal, to me, says first we demolish it and then we get rid of it. I guess I'll ask specifically, why is the word disposal in this warrant?
To be quite honest, Sam, being a contractor, disposal is a very large cost of this project.
If I may interrupt, if you read the article carefully, it says demolition and disposal of the town-owned fire station. That's what we're talking about disposing. In other words, the debris from the demolition. We're not talking about disposing the land. We're talking about disposing the building, whatever's.
In my day-to-day business, Sam, we always qualify it by, we include disposal as well. So demolition and disposal is meant to be.
So then we're on the record with the explanation of the word disposal does not mean dispose of the property, it means dispose of the debris.
Absolutely correct.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Tom Fall, Precinct 5. Some previous speakers have mentioned what we're going to maybe do with the property in the future. How is that zoned now? Is it Center Village or
I believe it's zone public.
public? Could this body zone it as open space in the future?
I'm sure that we could put restrictions and zone it as open space or what have you. I think the speaker behind you might be able to answer that question better than I can, but she would be able to tell you. But I'm sure that we can put protections in place to make sure that this is the gem that we would really like it to be.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Sue Carter, Precinct 5, former planning board member. Just point of information for the last speaker. Public zoning is open space. It's public use, so much of our open space in town is zoned public so that somebody couldn't go in and develop it. So it's just sort of a checks and balance on zoning. My question is, with the Dutton House, I know we've seen a lot of publicity about that, going out for bid and stuff. Would it be possible to bundle the Dutton House and this property so that somebody could move the Dutton House and develop this with the Dutton House, and that way we'd sort of get a 2-for-1 deal? We'd have something to do with the Dutton House. It would be an appropriate building to save it and have it come in the center of town. Is that possible, or is that just a pipe dream?
Paul?
Sue, anything's possible. Our latest rounds of bids for the Dutton House are due next Wednesday.
Okay, so we're almost too
And I'm
late.
not saying we couldn't cancel that and redo it again, but the only interest we've had thus far in the Dutton House has been a couple parties have expressed interest in taking it and moving it onto their property. I suppose it could be an instance, but my preference would be, let's get rid of the Dutton House. It's been long enough sitting there vacant and decrepit. I would recommend to the board that they take a proposal, if it comes, to relocate it. The library trustees have been patient with us, but again, it would be up to the Board of Selectmen to decide whether to accept that or whether to go out to bid once again.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any additional questions?
Mr. Moderator, Kevin Martin, Precinct 4. I'm just wondering why the building that's behind the fire station today isn't represented in this photo.
You can ask the question of...
Yes, to the speaker.
Because I'm not very good at photoshopping, so I just, I took a picture from across the street on the Common and kind of took a picture of the toll house and a few things.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
plunked it in.
But I think the picture's been up here for quite a while, and it's really not the right view when this building, if it does come down, what's going to be there. You're going to see a big building there on about half of that, give or take roughly half of that picture. It's going to be a big building in the back, and not that many trees either, I don't think.
Okay, thank you.
Jeffrey Merrill, Precinct 2. Those estimates that you got was for renovations on a fire station. Now, if you're not parking heavy trucks on there, obviously the restrictions in the building won't cost that much to repair.
Were
those estimates for a
Well,
fire
sir,
station?
you asked one question. Give him an opportunity to answer it. I'll certainly give you an ample opportunity to ask additional questions.
I'm going to ask Jonathan Longchamp, the engineer that wrote the report, to come up, but I will say that from what I know, after studying this building for the last 10 years plus, what happened, and the reason that floor deteriorated to begin with was because there was never a protective coating on the concrete. So years of trucks pulling in and the salt and salt water and everything permeating into the concrete has rusted the rebar and caused other damage within the building such that I'm not sure, and I'll let the engineer speak to it here in a moment, but I'm not sure that that floor
Well, I
would
guess
would
this
even be
question is
capable
for
of
the
office
engineer.
loading, so.
Yes, my name is Jonathan Longchamp. I'm a structural engineer, and just a little bit about myself is, first half of my life, I grew up in Chelmsford. My parents still live here in Chelmsford, so although I don't live in Massachusetts now, I'm not really an outsider. The second half of my life, I've been a structural engineer, and that's all I've done my whole career. I've been involved in a lot of type of these kind of projects where you got a problem with a building and you're trying to figure out what to do with it. And I walked into this building about 11 years ago. That's probably the first time I've ever been inside that building. And I thought I was stepping back in time, to be honest with you. You know, looking around, not only at the structure, but the rest of the facility, how antiquated everything was inside that building. So our first impression was, well, we'd have to study that apparatus floor and see if there was any way to salvage it. And the further we got along into it, we realized that there was no way to really salvage it. All we could do was hope to hold it up until something else could be done with the facility. And back in 2009, they asked us to put a preliminary design together for a replacement slab, which we did, and that was intended to support fire trucks. However, the design doesn't really change much. If you read the report that they've posted online, that's a 10-inch slab in there right now, reinforced concrete slab with steel beams, steel columns, and basically that all has to come out, and you have to put a new structure in there that would be capable of supporting whatever use you plan on using there. So as far as that cost estimate goes, it's not going to change considerably to go from a 10-inch slab to a 6-inch slab, let's say. You know, it's not a 40% reduction in the cost by any means. It's probably a 5% reduction in the cost. So it's kind of irrelevant to think that way. So hopefully that answers the question that was brought up.
Thank you. Any additional questions?
Andy Sillings, Precinct 7. Just a quick question. Let's say we clean it off and there's lawn growing there. Which committee or which group of people in our town can decide what to do, what to plant, what to pave?
My understanding of how it would go, like any project in town, there would likely be a committee formed by the town manager and the Board of Selectmen. That committee would provide recommendations, and then from there, those recommendations likely, especially if it involved funding, would come back to this body for approval.
Oh, but it would come back to this booty. All right, I'm going to sit down. I understand. Thank you.
Glenthorne, Precinct 5. This may be for the structural engineer. If we abandon the building, close it up, minimum amount of maintenance around the structure itself. I've read through the Daigle report, and it's frightening. The question is, with sufficient snow load, which could happen from time to time in New England, is there a possibility that the roof on this building might collapse?
Well, most of my involvement has been with the floor structure until this past summer when I was asked to go in and take a closer look at the entire facility. And a lot of the roof framing is concealed from view by the existing finishes. In fact, I pushed up many ceiling tiles trying to get a better look at the existing roof structure. I was able to see it in just a very few selected areas, but what I saw from above concerned me more than what I saw from below. Above, when I stepped out onto the roof, I saw that there were areas where there's ponding water, there's deflection in the roof that doesn't allow the rainwater to find its way to the drains. So whenever I see that on a roof, I immediately think, well, okay, what's going on here? Why is this roof permanently deflected to the point where it now retains the rainwater instead of draining off into the drains like it's supposed to? So I know there was an addition put on the rear roof of the building. The second floor is only about half as big as the first floor, and they expanded that out. I believe the chief's office is out in that space. And there's no drawings or anything available for that construction out there on the roof. So I did see some distress underneath that area of the building, which I had some concern about. But again, without tearing all the finishes off, I'm not going to get to the bottom of it. So I wouldn't rule out the possibility of, if that building's abandoned, unheated, it's going to hold more snow load than it ever has. And with the water that ponds on the roof, perhaps the roof drains freeze up and you have some kind of a problem like that. My bigger concern with leaving the building abandoned would be that timber shoring that's in place holding up that 10-inch concrete slab. That actually came from my training as a FEMA urban search and rescue structural specialist. And that type of shoring tower is designed to hold up partially collapsed buildings until you can rescue any trapped victims. We've extended its use now to hold up fire trucks for the past 10 years. And that's, in my mind, kind of okay because the station's occupied 24 hours a day. But if you now pull those people out of there, and if a fire does get started down there, it's not a place you want to put a fireman in there trying to fight a fire in the basement of that building with those shoring towers burning and a 10-inch concrete slab that's not structurally sound on top of them. So,
in looking at the distorted roof that you've just described, have you noticed any of the exterior load-bearing walls being compromised that might cause additional concern for its ability to support a lot of weight?
Well, there's quite a bit of exterior cracking in the CMU or cinder block walls, and that's associated with the foundation. That also shows a lot of step cracking and diagonal cracking, vertical cracking, and we believe that's all related to some foundation settlements that have been occurring there, and it's ongoing. I don't think it's reached the point where it's a concern that the thing's going to collapse tomorrow or anything like that, but it certainly has progressed in the 10, 11 years that I've been in that building, and so there are some concerns.
Have you noticed any deterioration of the mortar at all in the bricks that surround the building?
There definitely is some. I wouldn't say that there's a heavy deterioration in the mortar joints. I've seen sometimes mortar joints that are completely washed out, and in this case it looks to be in relatively sound condition. But that's just from the outside. We haven't done any testing on it or anything like that. So.
Thank you.
Bob Joyce, Precinct 1. I have a couple questions for the previous speaker, through you, Mr. Moderator. I didn't get the name of the company. Are you from Daigle? Oh, okay. You're from Daigle. So you did all the prep for the fire station in advance?
Yes, I'm with Daigle Engineers. I'm the owner of Daigle Engineers.
And when did we do the floor over?
We never really did the floor over. When we first got involved, it was a matter of it was deteriorating. It was deteriorating because the meltwater off the fire trucks is coming in the wintertime. Salt-laden meltwater is saturating the concrete, corroding the rebar, corroding the steel beams that are encased in the concrete.
But we did something. Yes. I remember going by there and seeing the cement.
In 2010,
right.
That was a last-ditch effort to ride this horse to the grave, basically, was to, patch it up, seal that water, because in the 5 years since the shoring towers went up, all we saw was additional deterioration, and we finally said, you're going to lose this if you don't put some kind of waterproofing membrane over the top of this concrete slab. And it was a pretty extensive job where they took out a lot of concrete out of that building to lay down new mortar material, patching material for the slab. But at that time, there was no additional rebar put in the slab. The conditions that they found were pretty bad. In fact, they at times were were chipping right through the 10-inch concrete slab, and we told them to back off with the size of the chipping hammers so that they wouldn't do that, and that we could limit it to a topside surface repair as opposed to full depth repairs.
Okay. Would it stand the reason that if we weren't putting fire trucks in there on a regular basis or at all anymore, that it would still be a threat? I mean, if it were just a cement concrete area, and for instance, the idea of having a museum, and there'd be no vehicles in there, then there'd be no stress on the floor, right?
That wouldn't be true, no, because you couldn't do anything until you took out the shoring towers, put in a new floor system, and then you could use it for a museum if that's what you chose to do.
Yeah, but it certainly, it wouldn't be, would it be the same rating as for a fire truck?
No, we talked about that. You know, our preliminary design back in 2009 was to replace that slab to be able to support fire trucks, and it was essentially a replacement in kind with a 10-inch concrete slab. If you went in and tried to do it for a museum, let's say, then you might be looking at a 6-inch concrete slab. But again, it's not a 40% reduction in the cost to replace that floor just because you went from 10 inches to 6 inches. Everything else is pretty much still the same, all the other costs. So you're saving a little bit of concrete is what it comes down to.
Okay, thank you.
Fran McDougall, Precinct 1. I have another question for the Daigle concern, please.
Okay.
I heard you mention that, is it true that when they laid the cement, they did not do it with sufficient coatings and so forth? Do you know anything about the mix of that cement? Is it the same as the bearing walls that are now, you could see through them to the outside?
I would venture a guess that it's very similar.
I would venture that guess
okay.
also.
Now,
now
no comments, Fran. Just ask your question.
I would also like to ask Mr. Maloney, what is the cost if this body decided to take this body of cement and seal it up and not tear it down? What is the cost for that as opposed to the cost of just tearing it down and leaving it up to this body at a future time to decide what to do?
Well, I think to put this building in any kind of usable shape, which would, as we've discussed, which would mean replacing the floor, which would mean bringing all of the conditions of the building up to current.
No, I'm asking
condition
not
code.
that, Pat. I'm asking to seal it up until we're ready to do something with it. Close it up.
Oh, to close the
Close it
building
up,
up?
yes.
Oh, well, to
Seal it up.
mothball the building? Is that what you're asking? What it would cost if we mothballed the building?
Yes.
Okay.
That's the word.
Well, we'd have the cost of boarding it up, which we'd estimate to be about, the chief would require FEMA standard, boarding up. So we'd say $5,000 to $10,000 for that. We'd have to, as much as you'd like to just shut the heat off, you can't necessarily shut the heat off in that building because of snow loads and the fact that the basement regularly floods, and if that flooded and then froze, so there'd be a cost to heat the building. Last year, granted, it was occupied, but we spent almost $6,000 in natural gas alone to heat the building last year. In addition to that, you'd have costs for, and I believe I'm correct, around $5,700 for vacant vandalism insurance policy for the building. So there are costs associated with keeping that building mothballed. So, I mean, total initial costs, $20-something thousand.
And so if we just, I have to get this straight in my head along with everybody else. What we are here this evening for is that just to demolish the building and not make any other decisions on this property without coming back to this body?
Okay, that has been asked and answered, and the answer was yes.
Right. We did not want to cloud any issues. We just felt like the building should come down and the property should remain town-owned.
Beth Logan, Precinct 3. An earlier question was asked about the trees, and I'm wondering, is in this budget anything for landscaping trees, grass, other than just fill in the hole?
Currently, our intent would be just to lumen seed the level lot at the time. If we were fortunate enough and, we didn't use any contingency, if, we'd hesitate to do that, but the possibility's there that we could put a few shrubs there to get some trees growing at the back of the lot if we needed to. And if, we would hear that message loud and clear if somebody said, throw a few bucks at some arborvitae at the back of the lot or something like that. We would heed that warning.
Paul Erickson, Precinct 5. Pat, if we vote tonight to tear this building down, realistically, how long is that process going to take?
It would be down probably, we wouldn't wait. We would, there'd be, I believe we'd have to go through Historic District Commission first and go through a public hearing there just because it is within the district. Once we got through that, I would guess that, we'd be into January. But in the meantime, we would be doing the hazardous material analysis and performing those other duties such that once clear of the public hearing for the district and having the hazardous material assessment done, we would go out to bidding on the package. And I would say, really, to take this building down, you're probably talking about a week of work. So I would say by the end of February, this building would be down.
So we're not going to have to winterize it and board it all up?
No, we would go right to work.
Just start tearing it down?
Mothball it and start tearing out, piping and all that type of stuff.
Dave Hadley, Precinct 3. I'm just wondering, is there any way that we could go through the process of preparing to demolish the building by way of going through the Historical Commission and everybody, and getting everything in line and ready to go, and then come back in spring town meeting and make the final determination as to what we're going to do, given that if nobody comes up with a good plan or a good reason why we shouldn't demolish the building, and just be ready to go in the spring to demolish the building. And just, we're talking just keeping the building at 35 or 40 degrees anyway. It's not like it's going to cost a ton of money to keep the building at 70 degrees and have fire trucks going in and out all winter. And
Right, you've asked your question, so give him an
sorry.
opportunity to respond, please.
Best I could tell, I'm not sure it'd be appropriate to go and ask other boards to do a lot of work when we didn't have funding and we weren't sure that it was ever going to happen. So that's how I would feel about it.
Okay. I guess my question would be, can we find a way to do that? To just prepare to demolish and then make the final determination in the spring? That would be my question.
Well, again, because of the safety of the structure, if we were to wait until April for town meeting, we would still have to prepare the building for winter. We would still have to leave the heat on. We would still have to worry about the pumps in the basement. We would still have to worry about snow loads on the roof. We would still have to initiate the insurance policy. We would still have to do all of those types of things. So our direct response would be different than if we knew that we had the funding to go for demolition.
I guess my next question would be that I ask that we find a way to do that. And
Okay, that's not a question, that's a comment.
Okay, I'll be back.
I'm sure.
Rich Day, Precinct 8. Just some clarification. If this body approves the funding to do the demolition, who actually makes the decision whether we go forward with the demolition or not? Is it this body that's making the final decision, or is it the Board of Selectmen that make the final decision?
What would happen is, you saw the cost estimate for the demolition and so forth, $75,000. In order to do that, as we said, we'd go out to bid, we'd receive bids, I would then make a recommendation for a contract award to the Board of Selectmen, and then I would need 3 votes from the Board of Selectmen to execute that contract.
Okay. So technically, this body is only making a decision about the funding, this body is not making the decision to demolish it right now or not to demolish it right now.
Right, this body is an appropriating body. In this article, the Board of Selectmen would be the final decision regarding the administration of the project.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions? Apparently none. Does the Finance Committee have a recommendation?
The Finance Committee, the majority of the Finance Committee recommends this article.
And the Board of Selectmen?
Board of Selectmen recommends this article by a 3-2 vote.
We have an amendment, so Gail Kruglak, if you want to come up. I will read the amendment and allow the proponent to explain. Basically, it's a motion to table warrant Article 7 until an article is presented to include the future use of the site.
The motion that I presented to table this article has nothing whatsoever to do with the current condition of the fire station. I'm sorry? The motion that I've presented has absolutely nothing to do with the current condition of the fire station. We're all very much aware of the terrible condition and the engineering report, and I don't dispute those facts in any way. I'm not advocating for the town to either keep or sell the land, and I'm not advocating for any particular future use. The reason I'm submitting the motion is because it doesn't present any presentation for the future use of the site. I've been contacted by many people in town with varying opinions of the best potential use. Some feel that the best use is open space. Others feel it should be parking and public restrooms. And others would like to see some sort of rehabilitation and rebuild of the site, either in a private or municipal situation. A big part of determining the future use would include knowing what the costs would be. I know that many of you individually have very specific ideas of what the future of that site should be, but none of us knows what the majority of the opinion is because nothing has been proposed and we have no resident feedback. Without first determining what the community as a whole will support for this land and how much cost they're willing to bear, raising the existing building could either be the next logical step or it could significantly devalue it and it could remove some of the future possibilities. I've been a real estate appraiser for almost 20 years. People hire my company to evaluate what's called highest and best use in real estate. Determining the highest and best use is always the first step in a land valuation. No business plan would ever consider taking this first drastic step without first weighing all their options. It's short-sighted and it's poor business practice to make a decision that impacts the value of real estate without first knowing all the variables. If we're to place a thoughtful vote on what's truly in the best interest of the town, we have to have all the information. The homework hasn't been done, or at least it hasn't been presented to us. I think that this article should be brought back at Springtown meeting with a decisive and a supported plan that includes the costs. It's been presented to the Board of Selectmen with ample opportunity for public input for the future use of the land. I think we need the public's input on what they want to see there, and I don't think we need to decide what we think should be there.
Thank you for explaining your motion. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your perspective, a motion to table is not a debatable motion under the rules. So we will go immediately to a vote. An affirmative vote is to table the warrant article. A negative vote is to proceed, and then we would go through the process on the original article if this amendment is, or motion to table is rejected. You have 35 seconds to vote.
So without any debate or any opportunity to really think about this, it really comes rather abruptly for the town meeting reps. It's a close vote. Right now it's trending a little bit negatively. I think town meeting reps are of an opinion that most likely the outcome, whatever we end up doing with that property, would involve demolition. Though there is
the
obviously
amendment fails. Yes votes were 58, no votes were 75. Now we will go to debate on the original warrant article.
Wow, too bad I wasn't taller. Good evening. My name is Mary Donovan of 7 Tanglewood Drive right here in Chelmsford. Please vote no to demolish the Center Fire Station. Vote to renovate. It is an asset to the town taxpayers and visitors to Chelmsford and the Chelmsford people. A Chelmsford Historical Museum, a police, fire, EMTs, veterans, and the Gold Star Mothers Museum, and with an information center. The fire station is in a historical area. It is on the State Historical Register since 1975. It's on the National Historical Register since 1980, February 20th, 1980. Renovating the building, it's grandfathered by the bylaws. Demolishing it is not. We need a feasibility study and a committee for taxpayers' input with bids to renovate, not money to demolish. Just 12 to 16 months to help me investigate a little bit more. If this building has stood since 2003 to 2014 with no maintenance, with equipment and firemen living there days and nights, what is a few months delay for a feasibility study? Vote no. I have been in contact with a contractor who told me today it can be renovated. I've also been in touch with the state representatives who told me they would help me to get donated money and federal grants. Please, I ask all of you, give us a little time. The taxpayers do not want to see this fire station demolished. And I will work diligently with all the people that I have been in contact with this past few weeks. Thank you for listening to me. Please vote no and save the fire station.
Mr. Moderator?
Will Wagner, Precinct 8. I'd like some clarification on something that I heard earlier. This article is to requisition the funds to demolish the fire station. However, it is up to the Board of Selectmen to actually spend those funds.
Yes, that's correct.
So the Board of Selectmen could opt to not spend the funds and leave the fire station alone if that's what they decided to vote.
Yes.
Could I poll the Board of Selectmen? It was a split vote, I believe.
Sure.
The vote was 3-2 to go forward with this article. As you know, it's to appropriate the funds and not necessarily to spend them. I don't know what you're polling us for. Do you want to know who voted which way?
Yes, please.
Okay, I voted yes for this article.
I voted no.
I voted no.
Voted yes.
Yeah, maybe all right to emphasize a little bit. I did also vote yes, basically for that same reason. I would like the authorization tonight to ultimately move forward because I think it's the most likely solution, and I think funding it out of free cash rather than through debt or something like that in the future, if we were to come back in the spring, was a smart move. I would like to spend maybe another few weeks looking at it before making that final determination, but maybe not wait all the way until the spring, which makes it likely that if we do take the building down, it wouldn't be done until sometime during the summer. So my rationale was that if you authorize us tonight, we will do a little bit more due diligence, but then ultimately we would have the authority to move forward and demolish it if that is what makes the most sense.
Thank you. I'd like to encourage everyone to vote yes for this then, and then talk to the selectmen about what to do with it. I think funding it now is a good idea. We have the money, and if it is deemed unsafe, the winter, especially given 7 feet of snow in New York, is potentially hazardous to leave the building up if that's what is deemed. But I think that voting yes on this to take the funds out and prepare them for use is the right way.
I'm going to have to interrupt for a moment. Normally, I would not want to interrupt debate, but we have a new amendment, and we always deal with the amendments before we get to the article. This is an amendment by Mr. Joyce. I will read it, and Mr. Joyce can explain it. Basically, his amendment is to strike the entire motion and replace it with the fact that the Board of Selectmen appoint a committee of 5 members to study possible uses and report to the Board of Selectmen in town meeting in fall 2015. So we have to address the amendment before we discuss the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I just wanted to throw out a couple of events out over the years. Over 20 years ago, I was on the Board of Selectmen, and there was, at that time, our town manager wanted to tear down the North Town Hall and or sell it for $1. And we didn't do that, and you know, it's good we didn't do it, because we got a beautiful building now. And the next thing was, a couple years ago, I can't remember the exact date, but the Housing Authority had said, oh, we'd like to put some housing into the North Town Hall and the regular Center Town Hall. And at that time, all the neighborhoods got involved. I can remember Bernie Reddy down there strumming his guitar or a banjo or something, but what we did was we ended up recovering those buildings, and certainly the cost was high, but I think the returns been very high as well. And I think before we knock down buildings in town, we ought to look at things like this. Cracks in buildings are a given thing, certainly in the big cities, and the fact that we haven't gotten three bids maybe from bidders that could tell us exactly what it would cost us to renovate the building. Tonight, the explanation was from numbers that were in 2009, and it was based on a fire station type of thing. So I think that we ought to take this and appoint a 5-member committee and come back with some ideas. This, by the way, is a goal of the Board of Selectmen for 2014, that we were going to take this up, and then it became a subject of a petition. So I think we really need to take a step back, and hopefully this would include other people within the town who maybe haven't been involved in this, and maybe can come in with some new ideas. I recommend that you vote for the amendment. We hear all these things about safety, but yet for the past 8 years, we've allowed our firefighters to live in that building. And speaking of that, we have kids that come through that building every October. We didn't rule that out as a safety issue. I think the safety issue is just a means of making us scared of doing something with the building. Certainly the flooring and the structure could be improved, and it doesn't have to be up to the standards that we had for fire station, for fire trucks. So I ask that you vote for my motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Now is an opportunity to ask the proponent questions. Go ahead.
Is this the same as tabling it?
No, this is different than tabling it. This is to appoint a committee, right? This is different. It is technically different than the original motion, which was to table.
So,
Okay.
Mr. Moderator, since I'm standing at the microphone from the question to the town council, this motion is strikingly different than the motion that we were coming here to debate and discuss. Is this an appropriate amendment for an appropriations motion that we can vote up or vote down?
Through you, Mr. Moderator, since the proposed committee, and it is fairly common in town meetings for committees to be appointed to study the subject matter of articles. Ultimately, it's the moderator's call, but I do think he could properly find this within the scope of the article.
So through the moderator of the town council one more time, this does not talk about the appropriations that we came here to discuss at all, but it talks about the community discussing the possible uses of the building, which seems to me to be orthogonally divergent from the motion that we came here to discuss.
Mr.
Thank you.
Moderator? Mr. Moderator?
If there's no question before you, certainly if you want to...
I have a question on the floor to the town council, Mr. Moderator, if I may have an answer to the divergency of this particular wording in this motion.
Again, ultimately, it's a question for the moderator, but in my opinion, he could properly find that because the proposed committee would be studying the viability of saving the building, which would be the alternative to the appropriation for demolishing it, I think he could find it within the scope.
It's my opinion that we've done this before with the grinder pumps, and I think that although the Board of Selectmen would be able to do this even if the appropriation was passed and find a use, I think it's still within the scope of the article. So
I have a question to follow that now that I know that I can ask the question on this motion.
Sure.
The Board of Selectmen wants to become more informed about the discussions that have been taking place in the Permanent Building Committee. And from what I understand, the discussions in the Permanent Building Committee have been going on for literally years with respect to this property. And I assume that since we are focusing on this in this town meeting, since the time when this has become the major focus as opposed to some of the other things like the new fire station, DPW, this is one of the key areas I would expect the Board of Selectmen would have been keeping up to date on the progress of the Permanent Building Committee and extending their questions and concerns and responses to the Permanent Building Committee.
So get to your question.
Has the Board of Selectmen been actively engaging the Permanent Building Committee with their liaison? And I don't know who that is, Matt, or whoever it is. Have they been actively engaging the Permanent Building Committee?
go ahead.
Mr. Moderator, through you, this petition action was taken prior to going to the Permanent Building Committee. If the Permanent Building Committee had brought it to the Board of Selectmen.
I don't believe that's the question, Mr. Joyce.
Okay.
I believe the question was essentially who was the liaison to the Permanent Building Committee, and has that liaison been communicating to the Board of Selectmen the progress of the Permanent Building Committee in discussing this matter before this motion, this amendment was...
Thank you for summarizing, right.
I'm the liaison, and I probably attend more permanent building committees and meetings than a lot of people in town.
Okay, that's not the question of whether you attend. The question was whether or not you inform the Board of Selectmen what this was all about with this particular parcel.
If you give me a minute, I will answer that part. The Permanent Building Committee chairman has come before the Board of Selectmen on several occasions prior to this, and it was not necessary for me to bring the board up to snuff on it because he had reported on a couple of occasions what was going on. But there was no real charge made to the Permanent Building Committee to go out and get 10 signatures. We would have put it on if we thought it was the right time to put it on.
I'm a little bit confused by the answer, Mr. Moderator. Let me ask for a little bit more clarity. How many Permanent Building Committee meetings have there been since the first of the year, and how many have you been at?
Yes.
How many have I been?
Brian Latina, Precinct 4. Point of order, we're supposed to be asking questions about this motion, not about
Well,
selectmen meetings.
I think that it's a valid question regarding the fact that this motion has been presented. It is a citizen's petition, and I think that it's an appropriate line of questioning to ascertain how involved the Board of Selectmen have been in knowing what this proposal was.
With regard to appointing a committee,
No, with regard to the proposal that is before this board initially, and which is now being amended. That's what my understanding is of the inquiry.
In answer to your question, I've probably been to about half of all their meetings that have been held.
Good evening, Chris Bowman, 4th Precinct. Has the has the building inspector conducted a recent comprehensive inspection of the fire station? And if so, is there a report on his findings for anybody?
Mr. Moderator, through you, Mark DuPel, Building Commissioner. I have visited the site. I have not done a comprehensive written report, but I've read the Daigle engineering report, and I've done my own analysis. And what is your question regarding that?
My question is, what are your findings? Specifically, what are your recommendations as far as the fire station itself goes?
Mr. Moderator, through you, my findings are consistent with the Daigle report and maybe even more comprehensive. Just so everybody knows, no matter what use anybody tries, whether it's going to be public or private, that building is not going to be occupied the way it is. Never, in my opinion, as long as I'm building inspector. So that would sum it up.
Okay.
Just to clarify more, Mr. Moderator, through you, just to clarify more, whenever you take an existing building and you change the use, multiple codes kick into effect. Right now, technically, the only use that can be in that building is a fire station.
Right.
So when the fire department leaves, the only thing you could put back in there is a fire department. Any other use that you put in there is going to trigger all kinds of things. Typically, a change of use will bring in the architectural access board for all the handicap accessibility. We have the structural issues that have to be addressed. Once you start kicking in those structural issues and you start getting involved with different levels of construction to make those repairs, everything is sort of snowballs. So that floor turns into now replacing all the piers that support the floor, which turns into replacing the walls that are supporting the piers that are supporting the floor. So every time you do something, it jumps up another level, and the costs and the amount of repair keeps increasing.
I understand. In your opinion, do you believe that the building is structurally sound enough, not knowing exactly what that means, to withstand a typical winter?
Mr. Moderator, through you, that's an unknown. I would never make the determination that it could withstand anything.
Okay. One last question. Do you, at this particular time, do you have specific structural concerns of anybody even just entering the building? Just one person, no equipment, no nothing, cleared of everything, but just a person entering the building?
Mr. Moderator, through you, once the fire department leaves, the only person that should be entering that building would be for routine maintenance to keep it upgraded. It should not be occupied.
Yeah, okay, let me clarify. It wasn't for occupancy, it was just for a sense of the structural integrity as far as a person just entering. No occupation, but maybe a maintenance person going in. Do you have a concern for his safety?
Mr. Moderator, through you, I would have no problem with somebody going in to perform periodic maintenance, and I would have concern for his safety.
Thank you very much.
Mary France, Precinct 6. This is more of a point of order question than anything else. That amendment now becomes the motion. It says we want to appoint a committee to study possible uses. Possible uses of what? I mean, I know what Mr. Joyce has in mind, but the motion doesn't say anything. It says possible uses and report to the Board of Selectmen. So I have a question about the motion itself and its appropriateness.
Well, I understand, and I think that the town meeting reps have got to make a distinction, because as has already been testified or pointed out, the Board of Selectmen ultimately are going to be determined whether to pull the trigger on demolition if, in fact, that is what this board votes. All the board is voting on is an authorization to expend up to $150,000. Ultimately, it's going to be up to the Board of Selectmen to determine whether or not to actually expend those funds. So the Board of Selectmen, on their own, could appoint a committee to investigate possible uses before demolition or after. So I understand what your question is.
But there's nothing any longer in the motion that has anything to do with demolition. The motion is now only about studying.
I understand
and
that.
I think the motion at least should say what it is we're studying.
Mary, again, I understand what your question is, and I'm not trying to parse words here. There really are two different ways that you can view that. You study its use with a structure, or you study the uses without a structure. And I think that the Board of Selectmen has that authority. With respect to what happened with the grinder pumps a year or so ago, there was an appropriation in the original motion, which was substituted by having a study committee. And what happened was the town meeting voted to appoint a study committee, and then later, after the study committee had reported back, okay, then they voted to appropriate funds. All right? So I don't see how this is that much different than that situation.
Let me make it simple.
Mr.
If we
Moderator?
add the words uses
One
of
at a time.
If you were to add the words uses of the center fire station, I would consider it a complete motion. As it is now, the motion itself does not say what it is we're studying the uses of.
I believe that within the scope of the original article, it's implied that it's the fire station property.
Mr. Moderator?
Point of order.
Go ahead.
It's a motion to strike, so it would completely strike the initial motion, and therefore we would need to put that language in.
I'm going to defer to town council on this.
Through you, Mr. Moderator, I think certainly you could insert the words and it would clarify. That being said, the motion's been stricken, the article underlying the amendment has not been stricken. It's still a motion within the context of an article that deals with the fire station. So I think everyone would be on reasonable notice of what the amendment is contemplating.
However, to dispense with further discussion on that point, Mr. Joyce,
Yes, I'd like to-
will you agree that that you will insert in the motion
A friendly
that
amendment that a study possible uses of the central fire station.
property?
And report.
Property. Just put the address.
To study possible uses of the central fire station. Right.
Property. Right?
We can put property in as well, yeah. I guess, is that? Thank you, Ms. Moderator.
And Mr. Joyce, when you're done, can you provide us with an amended
Yeah.
version so that we have it for our files for the Attorney General's office?
I will.
Okay, so we have that clarified. We are talking about the same parcel of land that we were talking about with the underlying motion, article.
All set. Hank Cool, Precinct 4. I just have an engineering question. I mean, the study shows reshoring that floor, keeping the basement. Have you guys looked into getting rid of the floor, filling in the basement, and pouring a slab?
That could be, that
I
could
just
be a
wonder
proposal.
if this was looked at or bounced, discussed at a permanent building committee.
That could be one of the proposals.
My question really is, would it be safer if we did that, the building?
In my opinion, no. You've heard the engineer tonight say that the foundation is in structural disrepair as well, and potentially failing as well as the structure. So failing may be a strong word. I don't want to put words in his mouth. But he's talked about the foundation, he's talked about the walls, he's talked about the structure. And you would still have to, once you took out, and I'll invite the engineer up to speak to this, but once you take that floor out, which you would still have to do, you can't just go in and push a bunch of dirt underneath there and say, okay, we're supporting the floor with dirt. You'd have to take that floor out.
Right.
Now you have to stabilize that building. Further to that, you have to bring that building up to all current code.
But I just wanted to ask if you guys looked into that. That's
Hank, you know, and because you were involved for a long time
Right.
in the study committee, and how many things we went over and went through during the study, and we asked every possible what if, and you know, I know that came up in the past, and the question, and the answer was you still have to remove the floor, which drives you into all the different things
Oh, it's
that
still
would
gonna cost,
require
right.
the building to be upgraded structurally.
Right.
And I would invite the structural engineer or the building commissioner to come up and
Sure, I'd like
concur.
that.
As far as filling the basement in and pouring a slab, that is something that potentially could be looked at, but I'm not sure it's going to work out so well on that particular building. With the ground being up at the main floor level in the front of the building, and the ground being down at the basement level in the back of the building, if you try to seal up that back overhead door and fill that whole bathtub with soil, it may exert too much soil pressure on those foundation walls that are already distressed, and try to push those walls out. In addition to the fact that you'd be adding a tremendous amount of weight to the site with the extra soil that you would be putting in the basement to fill in the basement, that might also cause additional settlements to the building as a whole. So I don't think that's a viable option in this particular case.
Okay, so you'd have to probably put a new foundation. It'd be a lot of work as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, thank you.
Dennis Sheehan, Precinct 4. Mr. Moderator, to the presenter, fall 2015 seems like it may seem to many that it's a long time. Is this something that you would consider perhaps bringing it back for the spring of 2015 instead?
Sure, that would be, this was my original date, but if you think, if the body feels that that's a better date, then, you know, we can change that.
Would you consider that a friendly amendment?
Yeah, we can make it the spring town meeting in 2015.
Thank you.
Tom Newcomb, Precinct 9. Mr. Moderator, I'm not exactly sure who to direct this question to. I think maybe Town Manager Paul Cohen. Paul, the building inspector a few minutes ago said that in roughly a month, when the fire department vacates this parcel, that he would be concerned for the safety of anybody even walking into that building to do maintenance or cleaning. If the building is in that dire straits that within a month from now that the building inspector does not feel that even an individual person should walk into it, why are we parking multi-ton vehicles in it? If the structure is going to be that bad a month from now, why are we still occupying it right now? I'm really concerned. If it's that bad, why are we still using it?
Through you, Mr. Moderator, as the structural engineer can attest, we've had a structural analysis done of that building every 6 months. Every August and every February since I've been here, we have a structural engineering analysis of that building. As of this point, the last structural analysis was done in August, and it coincided with this report. So the question then becomes, when February comes, we're going to have to do another one. So we've not endangered any firefighters. I'm concerned about the safety of the firefighters. I'm also concerned about the safety of the equipment in those buildings. But I want to assure you and the firefighters and the residents of this community, every 6 months we've done a structural analysis of that building, and we'll continue to do so until that building is off the ground.
All right, so are there any changes in the structure or recent inspections that have been done since the last formal report that would cause the building inspector to feel that,
Let me have the structural engineer speak to that, since he's the one who performed that work.
Tom, as he mentioned, we've been in that building every 6 months, keeping an eye on the existing conditions, the condition of the shoring towers, and basically, it remains structurally stable.
Okay.
However, the question becomes, who's going to take responsibility for it moving forward? That temporary shoring is exactly all that it is, temporary, and
Okay,
it's been in there since 2005.
all right, but at this point, it is stable, is what I wanted to know.
At this point, it's stable, but
Okay,
if
thank
you
you.
walk away from the building, leave it unoccupied, who knows what's going to happen to it, so.
Thank you.
Mr. Moderator, through you, if I may, just to address the last presenter, the last question. I'm concerned about the safety of any person that goes into any building. The firemen that are in there now are very aware of some of the conditions in there, and they move cautiously through the basement area where there's fallen concrete from the concrete slab above. The average person going in there would not have that same knowledge and the same degree of cautiousness. But I'm concerned about every building, and I'm concerned about the safety of any person that goes into any building.
Thank you.
Glenn Thorne, Precinct 5. When we vote this down, if we vote this down, and if we pass the main motion, can the motion that we're looking at right now be presented to the Board of Selectmen and of their own accord put together such a committee as they could, of their own accord, decide whether or not to spend the appropriation?
If you vote this, I don't believe there is another motion.
No, I'm saying if we vote the main motion, can the Board of Selectmen put together this same committee that is in this motion to do the same things you're asking for with the appropriation approved, which they would also have to decide on whether to spend? So the spending of the appropriation, if we support the main motion, and this motion exactly as it's written, are within the purview of the Board of Selectmen to spend or not spend the demolition money, or put together this 5-member committee, or not put together this 5-member committee.
I suppose that's a possibility.
Thank you.
Mr. Moderator, may I debate at this point?
Well, if nobody else has any questions, then yes, you would be able to debate. Does anyone else have any questions? There being none, we're in the debate section. Yes, this amendment we can debate. We couldn't debate a motion to table.
I'm very uneasy about all of this tonight, and I have been for the last few sessions. This body was elected by the people of Chelmsford to legislate for this town. This is not the first time during this fall town meeting that the right to make decisions were taken away from us and given to committees. I really feel that this is a right being taken away from this body. We have a motion on the floor that we want to vote up or down on. This has no place, I believe, on this floor right now. We are the people who are elected to vote on this, not the Board of Selectmen. They will have their turn later. I was on a committee for Oak Hill. We studied Oak Hill for 1 year. Guess what? No action has been taken on what we came up with. So again, this will be like the Dutton House 5 or 6 years from now. We'll still be here. Maybe I won't be here, but people will be here. People will be here debating these issues, and I really resent the power of this body being taken away from it.
Thank you.
Richard Grove, Precinct 3. I urge the town meeting to reject this amendment. The amendment proposes that the selectmen appoint a 5-member committee to study what to do with the building. There are no statements about what the qualifications of those 5 people might be, whether they have any expertise, whether they know anything at all. We actually are blessed with a committee, I think it's called the Permanent Building Committee, which in fact has people who have a good background in engineering, town buildings, finance, and they have in turn engaged a professional structural engineer that's, I assume, licensed by the state of Massachusetts to evaluate the building. So they've done an excellent piece of work in figuring out what we should do. And their recommendation, in fact, is what's in the main motion. So I urge the town to reject this amendment, and let's get to the main motion where we can debate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Moderator, Patrick Maloney, 2 Bell Lane. When we do our work in the Permanent Building Committee, we constantly strive to save the town every penny we can. Every meeting, every weekly project meeting, so on. Which is one of the reasons I bought the 2 motions, because I felt we had the opportunity to save money. The DPW project, because we had the money, we would have saved some $1.5 million in financing. This was much the same way. The problem with the description of this motion by the author that I see is he said that we haven't even gone out to get 3 bids for what the construction would cost. In other open meetings, he's indicated that he'd like to get a second opinion from an engineering firm stating that they could, he'd write whatever they'd tell him to write. I took great offense then. I still, think that why would we go spend more money to get another engineering study? The Daigle engineer study, at the very end of that study, there's a stamp on it, and it's a stamp of Massachusetts engineer. It means that he's a legitimate engineer. I've just met the gentleman for the first time this evening. Never met him before, never spoke to him before. Do you think that engineer is going to jeopardize his stamp or his livelihood to write whatever we tell him to write for the report? So my problem is, are we going to go spend more money because now we have an insurance policy for a vacated building that we just bought? We're going to board the building up to mothball it for a while. We have to keep the heat on because of the flooding and potential ice problems and things like that. If we were to go out and try to get 3 bids, guess what? You have to go develop a set of plans so that you can get 3 bids. There's a cost to developing plans and specifications to even get an idea of what to do with this building. So, as the previous speaker said, we have a very talented committee that's looked at all of these possibilities, and we're happy to go back and answer any other questions that may come up. I am concerned that we're going to go spend more money and more money to get another engineering, second opinion, if you will, and then we're going to go spend money to say, well, let's get something together so that we can put it out to bid and see what the contractors say, because apparently the professionals that the town has hired, as well as the people that give of their valuable time, and these professionals, their opinion means nothing.
Thank you.
Glenn Thorne, Precinct 5. I believe there will, sometime in the near future, be a committee that's going to look at the possible uses for the land that this building now occupies. I believe that the Permanent Building Committee has a track record that we can rely on, and why do we know that? Because we can look at the North Town Hall, we can look at the Performing Arts Center, we can look at the new fire station, we can look at numerous reconstructed areas of our town, because the Permanent Building Committee is doing their job, and they've done their job this time as well. I've read the Daigle report, and it scares me even more than walking through the building. How many people have walked through the bottom of that building? I mean, that would be the awesome place to have Halloween, because it scares me to death, and as an engineer, I look at the things that can go wrong with that. So when we go back to the original motion, after we defeat this, which I recommend, we have to look at appropriating that amount of money to make sure that we have a safe location in the town without that building, so that the people here can decide what the next proper use is. And from my perspective, why I'm defeating this to vote on the main motion is I will never have the intention of selling that property away from the town. Property is too precious to this town, which is why we kept the North Town Hall, which is why we renovated the Old Town Hall, which is why we had such trouble finding a location for the fire station. Property is extremely precious to this town, so I suggest we get to the main motion by defeating this, and then ultimately the Board of Selectmen will have to decide whether or not they're going to support the demolition based on the information they get, and they will also decide how this committee is going to come together so we get a good new use for the property on which this fire station now sits.
Pat Magnell, Precinct 8. I'm speaking in support of this amendment. I don't see this as taking away power from this body. I see this as us directing the Board of Selectmen to form a committee so that the public's voices can be heard about what they want done. I don't think there has been any orderly and thorough opportunity for all potential uses to be heard and examined equally. When I first saw this article in print, voting money relating to demolition, I said, whoa, we're talking about demolition? Have we even decided what we want to do? You know, the old saying about putting the cart before the horse, I think it's time to put the horse first. Decide what you want to do, and then come back to us and talk about the money. I think common sense needs to prevail, and let's do things in an order that makes sense. Thank you.
I'd like to move the question.
We have a motion to move the question. Can we have that up on the screen? Where's Ted? Where is Ted?
We do tickets, maybe?
Hold on. Is that something you can do, John? If not, we'll you know what? We'll try to do it via the markers that you've got, and we'll see if it's too close. Here comes Ted, but Ted, we have a motion to move the question. You think we can do it by chits? Okay, we're gonna try it first. Oh, we're all set. We're all set. Okay, so as soon as you see it on the screen, you can vote. An affirmative vote is to move the question, which will cease further debate on the amendment. You have 35 seconds.
This is Kelly Beatty for Chelmsford Telemedia. Clearly, we're going to move the question and move on to the amendment that has been proposed by Bob Joyce, Selectman Bob Joyce, to essentially delay funding the warrant article for the demolition of the Central Fire Station, and instead to authorize or instruct the Board of Selectmen to appoint a 5-person committee to study future uses.
As a result of the vote, we will now be voting on the amendment itself. The vote was 120 in favor and 11 opposed. So now you're going to be voting whether we should refer this to a special committee, and we would be striking the underlying warrant article for the appropriation of funds. Yes.
Mr. Moderator, we hadn't started debate on the original motion.
Well, no. We still have to vote on whether or not we've had debate on the amendment. We have not voted on whether we approve the amendment or not. So we have to vote on the amendment first. So a yes vote is to grant the amendment, and we would then not have no further discussion on whether to appropriate funds. A no would be to bring the original warrant article back to the floor. 35 seconds.
So for those of you watching at home, there's an essential issue here, which is whether anyone can imagine using the building that the Central Fire Station is. Some have suggested perhaps as a museum, and what the cost of the town would be for doing that. The cost to demolish it and to remove it is no more than $150,000. Some of the estimates that we've seen suggest that to renovate the building, because it's only able to be a fire station as currently zoned,
The amendment fails. The vote is
would be of
44
order of $1 million.
affirmative, 89 negative, 1 abstention. We now will continue with debate on the underlying warrant article to appropriate $150,000 to demolish the existing fire station.
We in debate?
Yes.
Mr. Moderator, Tom Newcomb, Precinct 9. I urge the defeat of this underlying motion. I think it's really premature. I think that the committee that was part of the amendment that was just defeated is a good idea. I want to compare us to the town of Groton. The town of Groton went through a similar process that we went through in terms of looking at different sites for replacing their fire station and upgrading it. Kept getting turned down at town meeting. They eventually got one approved. While that was under construction, they immediately started looking at uses for their old fire station. They put out an RFP. Got some proposals. Their building is very similar to the size of ours. The lot is very similar to the size of ours. It's just behind their town hall on a side street, right next to a bike path. Very familiar. They got some RFPs, and they went forward. But the thing is, they were proactive in doing it. They didn't wait until the last minute, and now we're having this put in front of us and saying, oh, by the way, even though we've had all this time to look at it before, we didn't. And we're bringing it forward now where we want you to demolish the building because otherwise it's going to cost too much to take care of it over the winter. Well, if this had been done beforehand, if the Board of Selectmen was proactive with this, we could have had some RFPs, so we would have known exactly what we're doing with it. And I think that also by demolishing the building, we are limiting the options, what we can do with it, instead of expanding the options. So I urge defeat of this measure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Beth Logan, Precinct 3. I'd like to point out that there should be no surprise to anybody that we have been talking about building, then we went out for bid, and then we built another fire station, meaning that this one was going to be open. That should not shock anybody unless you moved here last week. And I also went and did my homework. And during this fall town meeting, between non-recurring and recurring cost, we have spent money, and this is not supposed to be our money spending time, that's April. We have spent approximately $231 per household. Keeping this, renovating it, and maintaining it year in and year out will probably be another couple $100 to renovate it per household, and then probably only about $10 per household per year. But to turn it into a museum will be more because you have to hire people, you have to curate it, you have to do other things. And I'd like to say, as a daughter of a veteran and a sister-in-law of a police officer who has been shot at 3 times that I know of, I have the greatest sympathy and admiration for the heroes of our country. But we have now 3 unused buildings, Dutton House, Mill Road, which we purchased without deciding what to do with it yet, and this building we don't have uses for. They are costing money. I think we as town meeting reps need to be the first people to stand up and say, hey, we have to start limiting how we're spending money. We need to send that message to the school committees so they'll start limiting theirs and not be unrealistic about long-term recurring costs like empty buildings. I hope that you all vote for this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Matt Hansen, Precinct 1. I agree with a lot of the comments that were just said before me, and I wanted to elaborate on my comments before. First off, I just want to say there was a lot of talk about selling this building and this property through an RFP process, and I just want to say it was mentioned in the presentation that this is a beautiful piece of property right in the center of town. I would never support selling this. We just spent $500,000 to acquire new property. I don't think it ever makes sense to sell this property, so if you'd be interested in saving it for its resale value, I'm never going to support it, and I hope nobody else would ever support selling this property. And in addition to that, I have been in favor of renovating a lot of other buildings, the 2 town halls that we have. I think those were smart financial choices. And I did have to think about this a lot. I felt a little rushed when it was first brought to the board, but we've had a chance to look at it for quite a few weeks since then. And I know that Permanent Town Building Committee has done their homework. The engineer that they hired has done their homework. And I don't think that it makes sense to spend somewhere around $1.5 million to try and renovate this building. I think the Board of Selectmen, if you approve this tonight, we can do a public forum. We're having a public input session soon. I'd be happy to have a public forum before we take our final vote to demolish it to get some new ideas moving forward. But I'm very excited to start looking at the new ideas such as a park or parking. I think this would be the perfect location for something like that, and I think that's what we should be focusing our efforts on. But the longer we keep this building open, maybe it's only $10,000 or $20,000, but it's money that we're wasting that could be put towards the new park that we're going to put there someday. That's what I'd really like to see happen. Please approve this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Richard Grove, Precinct 3. The North Town Hall and the Old Town Hall are both architecturally distinctive buildings. The Permanent Building Committee gave a great gift to the town in helping to find a way to restore them to beauty and to function. And the Performing Arts Center brings a great deal of wonderful activity and liveliness to the center of our town. The fire station was a utilitarian, functional, in my judgment, ugly and definitely architecturally undistinguished building. It's 60 years old and it's falling apart. So this first step to be able to reuse that valuable piece of property is to get rid of the old thing. And that's what's been presented, that's what we're asked to act on tonight, and I think we should. The second step will be to decide what to do with that piece of property, and I'm sure the selectmen will appoint a committee and move forward with something that would enhance our center, the Performing Arts Center. Thank you.
Thank you.
Glenn Thorne, Precinct 5. I completely agree with the previous speaker. By demolishing the building, we're going to create more opportunities for Chelmsford, because you have the opportunity for open space, you have the opportunity not to have the liability of a crumbling structure, you have the opportunity not to pay for however long it takes for anybody to figure out, if we go through that first, what it's going to be used for. It could be months, it could be 6 months, it could be a year, and that property would still be there with a closed sign on it. I think any step forward starts with bringing the property back to a usable condition, which is a demolishing of an extremely dangerous, falling apart structure. If you've been there, I don't have to show you pictures, you know exactly what I mean. That structure does not belong in the center of Chelmsford. Something else does. I prefer open space, but something else does, and that's why I think we should vote for this and move forward to make our center as beautiful as it can be.
Sam Polton, Precinct 8. I think most people in the room agree that this particular location would be a wonderful addition to our town-owned properties, whether it's open space or some other municipal use. In hearing people that don't want to vote to demolish now, it seems that the only reason is fear that somehow, once the building is demolished and the lot is level and looks beautiful, someone somehow will get an RFP out there that will have a response that would be too good to refuse. We came to a very good accommodation on the Mill Road property, and I'd like to see if we could do that once again. I don't think it would be out of order to add a few words to this by way of an amendment. You know, I won't, okay? And I won't, not because it's not the right thing to do to add the sentence "and to be held for municipal use until such time as it's brought before this board," which is what we did for Mill Road, and then try to get a unanimous vote. I am embarrassed for all of you who just did that. And do what you will, vote it up or down, but kindly don't do that again to anyone else who comes up to the microphone. We've all been patient, listening to questions and debate. I think what I was about to propose would get a unanimous vote by this body and get us home. I don't think that was called for at all. Mr. Moderator, I would like you to admonish those people and remind them not to treat people at the microphone that way.
I agree with you, Mr. Polton, and to your point, the property is zoned public use, so right now, absent an action of this particular board at some point in the future, it will always be public use, which would include open space.
Can we have town council go on record with that reading? Because that will solve what I'm wishing to accomplish.
Certainly, through you, Mr. Moderator, not only would the zoning have to be changed, but any disposition of public property has to be approved by this board, as I think the town manager said earlier, by a vote of 2/3 of this body. So zoning and disposition both require 2/3. So I think you're well protected.
Then I'll end my point as follows. I think to miss the opportunity to keep this parcel as it should be kept, and that is something that adds to a beautiful town common and the gateway to our town, would be foolish. We've now heard, not through an amendment, but through a ruling by not only town council, but the moderator, an assurance from the sitting Board of Selectmen, a recommendation from the Permanent Building Committee that the intent, which will be on record, of what's going to be done with this property after we demolish the building is to have it further enhance the beauty of the town. I don't think there is any longer any doubt that there is a deal, public, secret, or otherwise, to do something else. I would strongly urge us vote to demolish the building, plant some grass, get some shrubs, and while we see what we're going to do, we'll have something beautiful instead of a building falling apart. Please vote yes for this.
Thank you.
Beth Logan, Precinct 3, almost 2 hours later. I'd like to move the question.
We have a motion to move the question. Okay, so an affirmative vote would be to suspend further discussion on this motion, this warrant article, and a negative vote would be to continue debate.
There comes a point in any article where I think everyone agrees that it's time to vote, and I think we've reached that point here. Town meeting obviously agrees. I did have a chance to go through that building approximately
The
9
motion
months
to
ago,
move has been
and,
passed.
I have a hard time
11.
imagining that it
So
could
now
be
we will be
renovated
voting
in any
on
way to be
warrant
usable.
article number 7. Affirmative
So
vote
here's
is
the
to
vote
authorize
on
the sum
As
of
has been pointed out,
$150,000
this
from
is
free cash
not to actually
to
vote
fund the
to demolish the
demolition
building,
and
but only
disposal of the fire
provide the
station
funding that
building
would allow
located
that
at
to
7
happen.
North Road, and to grade the site to the level of the roadway.
Again, this is not a vote to require the demolition of the building, but only to authorize the funding, $150,000, to permit that to happen, should it be voted on by the Board of Selectmen. Seems to be passing by about a 60 to 40, 70 to 30% margin.
The article passes, 95 in favor, 39 opposed, 1 abstention.
We have one more article to go.
The noes were 39. We will now go to warrant article number 8.
Mr. Moderator, request no action under this article.
There has been, the proponent seeks no action. I believe that there is an amendment. And will the proponent of the amendment please go to the microphone? I will, please. Do you really want me to? The article reads as follows. They move to amend the main motion to appropriate the sum of $700,000 from free cash to be applied against the tax levy. The proponent is Mr. Joyce.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. It was thought earlier on that this would be an included action in the town meeting until we went through the actions of the what happened with the school committee. The only thing I can say is that I think it's time that the taxpayers in Chelmsford get a break, and I'm waiting for my PowerPoint to come up. And it's very simple. The employees of the town, through OPEB, we've given $1 million a year, and including this year. The children, for schools, additional funds of nearly $1 million in 2015. I'm asking for $700,000, which is available, to go back to the levy, and there will still be a small amount of free cash and what have you to go to stabilization. Our stabilization fund is in very good shape. The purpose of stabilization is for an emergency, like if a roof blew off a building or something like that. And I think compared to a lot of the towns around us, we have a lot of stabilization money. So I'm asking you to, let's give the taxpayers a break. That's it.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the proponent?
Beth Logan, Precinct 3. I'd like you to explain to me, do we still have DPW work that needs to be done for Phase 2?
Paul can answer that, I think.
I was hoping the Board of Selectmen were able to answer some of this.
Through you, Mr. Moderator, the majority of the Board of Selectmen, majority of the Finance Committee, and I recommend no action on this article. So that may answer your question. But the answer to your question was answered earlier by Pat Maloney, who was the petitioner for the DPW article. The DPW article to do the next phase is $1.9 million. When Mr. Maloney withdrew that article, he informed the Finance Committee that he'd hoped to bring this before the body at spring annual town meeting. So the bottom line to answer is yes, there is still a need for public works, and I think it's the intent of the petitioner to bring that forward to town meeting in the spring. However, with the other requests that came in, there wasn't 1.9 available without dipping into the town's stabilization fund.
I'm sorry, Mr. Moderator. I was hoping that the Board of Selectmen would answer the question so that we would know their awareness of town finances.
So you intended to poll the Board of Selectmen?
No, just Bob. So my second question is, how much are we still underfunded in, I believe there's both the OPEB, which I believe is the pension fund. Do you know that, Bob?
No, Paul does.
The other post-employment benefits is a liability of the town. It's not for the employees, it's for the retirees and the incurred costs that we, as a community, incur on an annual basis. So to answer your question, the last actuarial study that we have is that this community is incurring a $2.4 million liability every year for its retiree health insurance benefits for its active employees and retirees. We are only funding 1 million of the 2.4 million, or roughly 43% of that liability. So the short answer to your question is we're increasing our indebtedness or our future burden for next generations every fiscal year. So that 1 million, as I said, is only 43 of the actual cost that we're incurring.
So to clarify, this tax break of about $50 per household will end up being paid later by future generations, or maybe even us in a few years.
Dave McLaughlin, Precinct 6. What happens to the numbers in Article 9 if this is passed?
Through you, Mr. Moderator, when we get to Article 9, we would have to reduce that amount by the amount funded in this article, and because we can only appropriate what's available in funds for transfer to the stabilization fund.
Any additional questions for the proponent? There being none, time for discussion.
Mr. Moderator, Brian Latina, Precinct 4. All of a sudden, $700,000 isn't a whole lot of money because it's only $50 out of my pocket. But I have to tell you, the first year our town manager came to town meeting and I asked about the OPEB figures, he said that, I'll never forget, he said that no town in Massachusetts, with the exception of one, could afford the liability of their retiring employees. I still remember that and was kind of shocked. And then later, a couple of years later, we actually put $250,000 toward retirement. This year, we inadvertently spent an extra $1 million in the school system. And I realized, looking at this chart, that that taxpayer thing down at the bottom, that's me, that's my retirement. Might be only $50 to each one of us in this room and every taxpayer in town, but how am I going to retire? If I can't afford my own retirement, I got to move out of my town. And I'm looking at giving some money back to the taxpayers. This is a tradition that Chelmsford has had for many years with our former town manager. In fact, it's written into one of our bylaws. Our trash money.
No, we're in discussion.
Our trash money was actually written into a bylaw that they had to give us back anything not spent towards trash. $2.1 million in 1993 was an override, and we were promised that we would get money back each year. And for 15 years, we got a little bit money back from this 2.5% figure that we have here. In fact, a couple years ago, we had so much money that we actually funded a brand new fire station with operating funds. I don't think people may realize that, but that decision by town meeting, instead of putting a debt exclusion out, meant that firefighters pay raises to teachers, firemen, policemen, that those funds were no longer available because we're going to spend them on building a building instead. We made that decision because we had so much money. This money doesn't sound like a lot, but to a taxpayer and to the other taxpayers in town that I'm supposed to represent, $700,000 going back into their pocket that they overspent this year is probably a good idea, and I'm going to vote for this article. Thank you.
Thank you.
Janet Askenberg, 185 Westford Street. I'm also a member of the Board of Selectmen. I ask that you support this amendment. I do believe we have an obligation, and as elected officials, I do believe we have a duty to also consider our seniors, those folks on fixed incomes, and even our families that have children in the school system. They're paying a lot of money in bus fees, athletic fees, activity fees, and while $50 or $70 may not mean much to you, I think for everybody, every dollar counts. I also believe we need to strike a balance with our priorities here in the town, where we're amending the budget to account for a town deficit, a school deficit. We're looking at open space needs. Again, it needs to be a balance, and we need to think about the seniors, people on fixed incomes, and people who, count every dollar and look to us to continue to make Chelmsford an affordable and livable place. So please support this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Tom Newcomb, Precinct 9. I also urge support of this, and I think that we have to be mindful of where free cash comes from. Free cash comes from the taxpayers. It's money that we took in back in the spring. This body approved a budget. The free cash is money that is left over at the end of the year because either our expenses were lower or our income was higher. And we've used a lot of it to fund other things, but I think we also have to remember where it came from. We have a responsibility to give some of it back to the taxpayers if we have extra. It's not a windfall for the town. We have to be responsible for the people who sent us here, the taxpayers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Glenn Thorne, Precinct 5. I want to take off on Tom's comment about being responsible, because I think that's the key issue here with the decision on whether or not to take the $700,000 and make it unavailable for the town completely. The town has future debt, and we're recognizing that and trying to handle that. Before Paul Cohen became town manager, if you took our annual book, you would see that our stabilization fund was like going off a cliff. I urge you to do that. Take the annual report, and you'll see it's going down and down and down and down, and that cost us more money every time we had to borrow any money for any purpose in this town. With the management that we have currently, that stabilization fund has been built up, and that reflects itself in lower borrowing rates that are for all the projects that we have in this town. We also have things that come up that are unforeseen, which is why the stabilization fund is there. So, as much as I believe that we ought to use every dime we have in the most efficient way, I believe this money belongs in the stabilization fund to strengthen the underpinnings of the town, to give the town manager more to work with when we are borrowing money at a lower rate because we have the stabilization fund, that our bond ratings are higher. It's just good business practice to have that stabilization fund strong, stronger than it is currently, and it is good now, but stronger than it is currently, and be able to have the funds to pay those debts in the future should an emergency arise. So I would urge you to vote against this motion, maintain these funds in our stabilization fund for future emergency uses if we have them. Thank you.
Pat Magnell, Precinct 8. I'm standing here to support this amendment, and I'll be brief. We've been blowing away money like crazy over the past few days. And I'm speaking not just as a town meeting member, but as a taxpayer. Where do we stop? And I think the buck stops here. I think the people of this town would appreciate acknowledgement of where their money comes from, and throw them a bone, toss them a crumb. I'm supporting this because showing a limitation is even more important than spending the money. Thank you.
Thank you.
Doug Bruce, Precinct 9. In reference to a question earlier, how would this impact warrant article number 9? We'll be asked in a few minutes. As written, we'd be transferring $1.6 million to the stabilization fund. This amendment would reduce that such that we would still, after this amendment, if it were to pass, we would still be transferring $900,000 to the stabilization fund. I stand corrected, maybe?
The question is really after
If
having...
you could please speak into
Could
the
I ask that
microphone
the
so
town
everyone can
manager
hear.
or somebody please share that?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Moderator, the original motion that was in the book did not contemplate the town's acquisition of the Mill Road property. So therefore, the amount that's available now for appropriation is $1,243,436. So again, if you take 7 of that, you'd have roughly about a half million, 543,000 left.
Thank you. Thank you for the correction. I just want to say that I support this amendment, and I will use the approximately $50 to offset 1/4 of my school busing fee for next year. Thank you.
The different numbers that Paul just...
Nancy Arroway, Precinct 1. Generally, we do find most of the finances at Springtown meeting, and at that time, I had done some research on the increases in the town budget versus the increases in the average income of individuals in town. And if I remember those numbers correctly, the town budget was increasing almost 50% faster than the incomes of our citizens. On those grounds alone, I support anything that manages and limits the growth of our town taxes. So I would support this amendment.
Thank you.
Ruth Monahan, Precinct 3. I have a part-time evening job. I also am a senior citizen. I'm losing $60 being here tonight, and I did last Thursday as well.
Sorry about that.
And such is life. And $50 would look real good. But you know what? I think we've had a lot of unusual circumstances this year, and I don't think we can afford, I can't afford, to be happy with that $50, knowing all that we've had to cover. I do not think that this is the time to be giving money back, even to myself.
Thank you.
Jerry Mead, Precinct 6. Through you, Mr. Moderator, a question for the town manager.
Sure.
What would be the effect of passing this amendment on the levy limit in the following year and on the preparation of future budgets?
There would be no impact on the levy limit. The levy limit is the levy limit. What this would do is this would put us below the levy limit by the 700,000, but next year's levy limit would increase by 2.5% above the current levy limit.
Above the current levy limit. Thank you.
Yeah.
Tom Fall, Precinct 5. I have yet to hear what the Finance Committee feels about this. Could we have a report from the Finance Committee, please?
I'm not sure they took a vote on it, but I will inquire. Has the Finance Committee voted on this amendment?
Yes, we have.
And the recommendation of the Finance Committee is?
The majority of the Finance Committee recommends this article.
No. The amendment to...
Oh, I'm sorry. No, we have not had a chance to vote on this. Yeah.
Mr. Moderator, I'm here to speak on debate as town manager since it's not my motion. I'm going to ask that the town meeting defeat this amendment and take no action on this article. Although it may be popular for me to support a reduction in the property tax levy, I do not believe that it would serve the town's long-term financial interests. This can be illustrated by the requests that have been brought forth for your consideration at the last few weeks at the fall annual town meeting and at the special town meeting. The obvious example is the need to provide additional funding for the school operations. The town meeting had to cover what was estimated to be a recurring deficit of $588,000 in the current school year budget, which also took into account the reduction in services. The challenges for special education services and to meet the requested level of operations for future years will result in the need to tax to the levy limit in future years. The town meeting warrant for the following town meeting included the $1.9 million to fund the next phase of the Public Works Alpha Road facility. As I noted earlier, this was pulled for consideration due to the current financial situation. And as I noted earlier, we would like to return this at a future town meeting. Also, as we know, the town meeting approved the purchase of the land at 101 Mill Road with available funds. It was noted during these discussions that the Community Preservation Fund did not have sufficient resources to fund this acquisition. And therefore, future such opportunities may arise given the state of the Community Preservation Fund. I'd also want to point out that there was also an article that we took no action on that had to do with funding new collective bargaining agreements for the 2 police unions. Those contracts expired back on June 30th, 2013. So we're now in the second year without resolution of that contract, a contract that will have to be funded when the mediation arbitration process is complete. And that funding level would have to be sustained in future operating budgets. Also, if you look towards the near-term future needs of the community, there are going to be extraordinary capital needs that we'll need to consider by this town meeting body. As been discussions at the school committee and at the permanent building committee, the school's modular classrooms are nearing the end of their useful life, and investments will be needed to extend them or to replace them. And there's also discussions perhaps of seeking funds to begin the study of enhancements to the middle school science labs. Also, we heard at town meeting, and if you caught recent school committee meetings, that full-day kindergarten remains under active consideration by the school committee. I support this initiative, and the monies that were requested under this article, the $700,000, may possibly be used to transition towards full funding of this program under the tax levy. In addition, the special legislation that authorizes the town's operation of the Chelmsford Forum expires in 3.5 years, and therefore the town will be faced with the decision of whether to expend capital funds to acquire that facility, another extraordinary expense. In summary, if we place these monies into the stabilization fund, the town will be able to decide the decision of whether to continue to provide the quality of services that makes this such a great community. Thank you.
Thank you. If there's no further discussion, we will vote on the motion, which is to appropriate the sum of $700,000 from free cash to be applied against the tax levy. The amendment fails, 40 in favor, 92 against, 1 abstention, and since the main article has been withdrawn, we will now proceed to Article 9.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Article 9 is the last article on the warrant, and it's basically to take the remainder of the free cash and the overlay surplus to put that into the general stabilization fund. And as I mentioned earlier, I've given you the reasons as to why I think this would best serve the interests of the community. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you. Is there any questions for the proponent? There being none, is there any discussion? There being... please, let's not have those comments, okay? Everybody who approaches the microphone should be entitled to the respect of all the rest of us, whether we agree or disagree with that person's position. So go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. My question is, if this article is voted down, what happens to the free cash? Where does it go? How does it fit within the overall town budget? I mean, I don't have a clear idea.
Through you, Mr. Moderator, the reason we take this action, basically, if it's voted down, nothing happens. The balance stays in free cash, the $931,000, and the balance stays in the overlay surplus. The distinction is in order to appropriate from free cash and the overlay surplus, you need the majority vote of town meeting. The reason we make this request is we put it in the stabilization fund by a 2/3 vote. It takes a 2/3 vote to expend that money.
Mm-hmm.
So in essence, this is the conservative way of holding on to the money, requiring 2/3 vote to expend it.
Okay, so it doesn't, my concern was it doesn't disappear anywhere.
No.
It's just, it stays on the books, but in a different aspect.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Manager, could you please, I can't see the screen. What are the actual numbers?
It is $931,348 from free cash and $312,088 from overlay surplus to the general stabilization fund.
Thank you.
312.
Is there any further discussion? There being none, we shall vote on the article. An affirmative vote would be to transfer from free cash the sum of $931,348, and from the overlay surplus the sum of $312,088 to the General Stabilization Fund. Vote now.
General Stabilization Fund, and to be used for some other purpose down the road. I think we'll very quickly adjourn here.
The article passes 124 in favor, 8 opposed, no abstentions. I'd like to have a motion to adjourn.
Thanks, I'll see you later.
All in favor? Thank you very much. Have a happy Thanksgiving, and I'd like to thank Chelmsford Telemedia for their assistance in for town meeting. Thank you.
Well, that's very heartening to have a little applause for us here in Chelmsford Telemedia, who bring you these telecasts. And as I have to say, on behalf of the staff, when we have these go on for 4 nights, that's 4 nights that these our guys have to be running the cables, picking up the cables. It happens to be a pretty decent night tonight, but boy, if it's rainy or if it's cold, it gets really, really bad. Not pleasant work at all. And so shout out to you out there in the truck. In any case, I guess I probably won the bet. I thought we would be done here at 9:45, and it's just a couple of minutes past 10, certainly not as late as it could have gone. Interestingly, in my sense, is that the fire station vote, or whether to appropriate the funds to demolish it or not, took a lot longer than I would have expected, 2 hours. And sure, as one of the town meeting reps pointed out, unless you just moved into town a week ago, we've known about this issue with the fire station, and somehow we were going to have to deal with it. It's only really with the presentation of the report, the structural engineers report by Daigle Architects, that we found out just how much work is going to be involved for anyone in renovating that building. And I think that was probably the final nail in the coffin in terms of making the decision to tear that building down. As you heard, that will certain things have to happen. We have to go through the Historic District Commission first, and you can probably expect to see that building torn down probably by the end of February. At least that was the estimation here tonight. So we want to wish you all a happy Thanksgiving, and thank you for joining us all these 4 evenings, which began a month ago on October 20th. This has been one for the ages, but we'll all convene again next spring for the first town meeting of the new year of 2015. In the meantime, thank you very much, and have a great evening.